Okay. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning to the world, and welcome to the stream. We do it live here, usually. Some new bumper music for you there to change the pace a little bit. Let's get rid of that. That's enough of that. We've got some business to get down to. And the first thing I'd like to say is for all of those who happen to see this on replay in the future, like, subscribe, share if you will. Even if you hate it, give it a big thumbs down. It works for me too. No big deal. Either way. And if you find some value here in this content, I would ask you to share these videos around. Encourage people to come here and subscribe because I need your help to make this channel, to fill this channel out, to grow this channel. We're setting our goal at 1,000 subscribers right now. We need to get there first so that the channel can be, legitimate. You can't really have a legitimate YouTube channel until you get to 1,000 subscribers because a lot of the features available to use in YouTube they're not available unless you have 1,000 subscribers. I'm not talking about monetization. I'm talking about features like the community feature where you can send out an announcement to your subscribers that'll show up in the feed. Sometimes you could take a poll, ask subscribers questions and find out what they want to see. Take a poll that way, or just announce a stream, announce information. Anyway, there's some features that come along with the growth of the channel. So I'm just putting it out there. Let's all work together as a community here and try to grow this channel because it seems like we're not going to be getting any help from the outside. It's okay. Everyone's busy with their own thing, and you know what? We're going to have to do this ourselves, I'm afraid. So that's even better. That's okay. We'll grow it. We'll grow it together. You and me. All right. So today, we're talking about atheism. Surprise, surprise. Talking about atheism. Specifically, what's wrong with atheism? You see, there's no question mark in that thumbnail. This is not a question. What is wrong with atheism? No, this is a statement. What is wrong with atheism? So, of course, we're not pointing out individuals, many fine individuals that I respect and enjoy quite a bit who are atheists. This is the broader representation. So let's talk about this a little bit. I'm going to make some observations based on my encounters with atheists. I tend to be fair and treat this issue truthfully. Now, this is not going to be a scholarly or a scientific observation, although I will appeal to some polls. By the way, in the description, you'll have links to some of the statistics that I give and some links to some very interesting things that I'll get to in just a moment. So don't forget to check that description. There's always relevant information in the description below my videos. So this is not a scientific observation. This is anecdotal for the most part, my own viewpoint. As I see it, after meeting with, debating with, and conversing with more atheists than ever in my life over the last couple of years since I've made this push into ministry and to be on YouTube as a Christian YouTuber. So I'm not making claims upon all atheists, as I said, of the world. However, when you take a straw poll, the similarities I'm going to mention are unavoidable. What does atheism have to offer humanity is a question. Does it offer hope? Does atheism offer solutions to problems? What are the most common similarities among atheists that I've met in my experience? And as a disclaimer, I want to start out with this. I want to say something about religion Now, when we talk about, we hear often coming from the atheist side of a debate, or just in the comments below a video with vitriol, that religion, Christopher Hitchens said, religion poisons everything. Well, there's a big difference. I want to point this out because I think this is an important point to make. There is a big difference between religion, as the term is commonly used, and being a follower of Jesus Christ, a Christian in the purest sense of the term. There's a difference between religion and being a follower of Jesus. I might keep the commands of Jesus religiously, but that has nothing whatsoever to do with religion as a popular concept. So we see I think an attribution error quite often, saying religion poisons everything. Well, you know what? I would agree that almost every religion in the world can cause problems, does cause problems. And even within Christianity, of course, there are groups. We're talking about human beings, and human beings are flawed. So, if you're a humanist, you're putting your faith in a flawed system. So, as I said, I might keep the commands of Jesus religiously, but that has nothing whatsoever to do with religion as a popular concept. You see, a man, according to God's own word, a man can find salvation without ever seeing the Bible, without ever hearing the name Jesus Christ. In the Bible, we have this message. Think of Job. Think of Abraham. Think of Melchizedek. Think of people who came long before Jesus Christ. How did they come to salvation? Through something called faith, which is not belief without evidence. Specifically, you look at these people from deep antiquity. And how did they find salvation? Through God's general revelation, in the way that they reacted to the world that they saw around themselves. Faith. In other words, having confidence in that which you see, the evidence you see all around you. But since Jesus Christ came into the world, God no longer winks at our ignorance. So to think that you could come to salvation any other way than Jesus Christ today, that's a risky proposition. That's not the way to go about it. But I'm pointing out to you that it's possible. It's possible because there are, rare as they might be, there are situations where that is possible. You hear the question lots of time, what about people who have never heard the gospel? Well, in a case like that, someone sincerely never heard the gospel, doesn't know the name of Jesus Christ. You didn't think God had a method for those people? Of course. Now, also this idea, I'm going to hear, after making this video, it's going to show up in the comments below, because most of the time atheists that comment below videos don't watch the video. They say, oh, here's a Christian YouTuber, here's a title. Oh, I'm going to say something. I'm going to regurgitate something in the comments section. It happens. But so you're probably going to say in the comments, without watching this video, you're probably going to say, listen, atheism is just lack of belief in a God. We're not a movement. We're not an ideology. Let me show you something about this idea that atheism is not a movement and not an ideology. This is a website called atheistsites.net. It's just sort of a clearinghouse or maybe a listing of atheist websites and organizations, societies. And what you see here on your screen now, these are category heads. Look at this. I've got the link to this page in the description, so you can see that. Look at these American Atheists. Now that's a very popular one. Many of the YouTube atheists, I seem to be a member of that organization. But the Free Thinker and the Secular Web, free thought. So there's a lot of idea that atheists are free thinkers. American Humanist Association. Look at this. Folks, this goes on. The Richard Dawkins Foundation, the Ex-Christian Foundation, the Atheist Zone, the Atheist Republic, Atheist Discussion, Atheist Universe, Atheist Forum, Skeptic Friends, Happy Atheist Forum, Debating Christianity, Skeptic's Guide, Debunking Christianity, Free Thought Blogs, Patheos. Okay, if you're going to come on here and tell me that this is not a movement, you're kidding yourself. You might be the only one. But look at this. I'll just give it a... This goes on. There are hundreds and hundreds of examples. The Brights. I think one of my favorite atheist organizations is the Brights. They're known as the Brights. If I could find it again here, that would be fun to click on. Thebrights.net. The Brights. Because they're brighter than you, right? I guess. Here's thebrights.net. Who are the Brights? We are participants in an international internet constituency of individuals. All of us have a naturalistic worldview free of supernatural or mystical elements. That's fine. A Bright's ethics and actions are based on a naturalistic worldview. The Brights aspire to an egalitarian civic vision. We want citizens to have a naturalistic worldview to be accepted as full participants in society. Okay. If you're going to tell me that atheism is not a movement, and in my opinion, a religious movement, you're going to have to contend with that statement right there. The Brights aspire to an egalitarian civic vision. Okay, they're all for equality. All right, well, that's a good thing, I guess. Depends on what they mean by equality. But more specifically, we want citizens who have a naturalistic worldview to be accepted as full participants in civil society. Well, of course. It's all any Christian wants. Christian doesn't want to exclude anyone from society. But what we're seeing here is the push of let's go ahead and risk it and say, of a worldview. You can disagree with that term if you like, but we're talking about an ideology, folks. We're talking about something that is definitely a movement to contend with, and a movement that has a message, has its leaders. You see, if atheism is not an ideology, vehemently defended like a religion, then why are there so many of these societies proselytizing the virtues of atheism? Societies, organizations, hundreds, maybe thousands of YouTube channels dedicated to extolling the virtues of atheism. And if it's not an ideology with a religious tint to it, then why are atheists like Lawrence Krauss using deception to defend their position in debates? Now, I've got a link in the description for you there where Lawrence Krauss was caught out, flat out caught out in an email that he had with Alexander Vilenkin that he showed in a debate with William Lane Craig, where he just flat out deceived the debate audience. And William Lane Craig, well, he caught him on it. He caught it, and he called him on it because William Lane Craig also has a relationship with Alexander Vilenkin. So check out that clip. It's just it might be 10 or 15 minutes worth, but it's very interesting. And my point is, if it's not an ideology, if it's not religious at its core, then what's that all about? What's the need to deceive a whole audience to make your case against another ideology? You can't just say that we just lack a belief in a God and that's all there is to it. We don't go any further than that. That's not true. That's not honest. Now, about this idea of what does atheism bring to society, I can't help. Now, I've noticed, if you've noticed in the thumbnail to the video, I have a little shot of Stefan Molyneux coming up. He's in the thumbnail because I have a lot of respect. As I said, there are many atheists that I have a lot of respect for and would be able to get along with just fine. I mean, really, people that I would love to sit down and have conversations with. And they're Well, Stefan Molyneux is one of them. And he's very honest about his fellow atheists in calling them out. And so I'm going to use some of his points because I happen to agree with those points. They resonated with me in a very strong way. And so I'll include some comments from Stefan Molyneux in this outline as well. But what I notice is that atheists that I've met in person, online in forums, and chat rooms, blog comments, and those who have chosen to come present their 2 cents under my own videos and on my website are overwhelmingly represented as progressive Democrats to even far left socialists who happen to be in favor, more in favor of big time government involvement in people's lives. Now, I know you might be that one guy or gal out there who just became very aggravated with me at that assertion. But I'm simply giving you my experience, the people I have come into contact with and had discussions with. You might be different, but the majority I've met so far are very much left-leaning. In fact, these links to these statistics are in the description. About 70% of atheists in the United States declare themselves as Democrats or call themselves political liberals. And when we say liberal in politics in the United States, we're not talking about libertarian. We're talking, it's a different term. So political Democrats, far left. 1 out of 10 atheists in various polls claim to be conservative. So about 10% of you out there, if you happen to take offense to what I'm saying about atheism right now, you might be in that 10%. However, 70% are somewhere to the left and far left at that. Socialist. Even when you meet on YouTube, you can find folks who extol the virtues of communism and socialism on YouTube, invariably atheists. Now, there is obviously nothing wrong with identifying one way or the other politically. Diversity is certainly a good thing in a case where various opinions are needed. And myself, I'm definitely not comfortable identifying as a Republican or even, if I was to do so, a Democrat in this current political climate due to the insane level of histrionic behavior that identity politics has caused in the United States and the world today. My own social and economic tendencies are conservative, and I've been registered that way for about 30 years now, while concentrating on casting my votes for individuals based on their policies. And let me also point out that I think that when we, just as a general statement here, when we consider government and what is more important, our attention should be focused locally. Make sure you know who you're voting for locally. You see, we're upside down in this nation. We have all our attention on the federal government. Well, my friends, it's the people who are making policies in your hometown that affect your daily life. They're going to affect you sooner than President Trump or President Obama or whoever might come next. So I happen to think that the media construct of a left-right paradigm is a dangerous thing that has led to definite losses of liberty and national sovereignty through the promotion of politics as a personal identity. Obviously, conservatism has its good and bad points. A positive of conservatism is the belief in smaller government. It's my understanding, after getting close now to half a century of experience as an American, that the federal government is out of control in its size and its reach into the personal lives of Americans. Now, it's my position, and the position of many Christians, that government should be robust locally and become less present as you move up from there into state and federal, for the reasons that I just pointed out. Now, the federal government should exist, this is my opinion, the federal government should exist to keep the nation secure from invasion and to keep the court systems fair and just, and nothing more. That's it. We really don't need them for anything else. But what we've seen over the history of our nation is a creeping cancer of federal government coming in and doing the work for the state. And eventually now today we see with things like the Agenda 21, the Sustainable Development Movement, we see non-governmental organizations coming in and influencing our local governments for the benefit of the United Nations plan. So strong local government, very small federal government is essentially the Christian point of view. Doesn't seem to be the point of view of most atheists, though. Nearly 3/4 of atheists affirm that government should be large and expand into the small communities. In other words, be involved in all areas of everyone's lives and manage programs like welfare and caring for the poor. In fact, polls show that most who affirm Marxist ideals of a central government being in charge of all facets of life are, in fact, atheists. That might not be surprising once it's understood that the biblical position on this subject was clearly articulated by Jesus Christ, as he was most certainly commanding communities to manage their own affairs and to not depend on a central government. Jesus said in John chapter 12 that there will always be unequal economic classes, and those who will be poor and needy, they'll always exist. The message from God in Deuteronomy chapter 24, Proverbs chapter 14, Zechariah chapter 7, and in second chapter of James is that it is our duty to take care of the poor and needy within our own communities, rather than appealing to a central government body to do it for us. How much sense does it make to depend upon a central body that might be 1,000 or more miles away to effectively disperse funds to take care of needy people that are 3 doors down from our own home? Now, this sort of national welfare does more harm than good, specifically in removing the responsibility from where it belongs. Us, the people who live in the community. And it creates classes of people who become dependent on the state. And of course, also, when you have these gargantuan government bodies who have access to these funds, of course, by creating the temptation for massive fraud and theft when there is a small group that has access to the control of the nation's coffers. No surprise there. No surprise there that fraud and criminal behavior, it's what you expect. It's, like I said earlier, if you're putting your faith in humanity, you're putting your faith in a flawed system. We are flawed. This is why Christians preach the need for a Savior, for one objective truth. Now, if you're out there and you're thinking something like, well, your God affirmed and supported slavery, things like that we hear so often, just not so fast, pilgrim. You probably have in your head this visual of modern slavery with slave ships and stark oppression of one race over another. A typical oppressive slavery was very rare among God's law keepers, and biblical slavery is it's a nuanced thing. You need to take up the study of it to understand it before you start assuming that slavery in the Bible looks like slave ships, 20th, 19th century slavery, 20th century slavery. In fact, the most common form of slavery in the Bible was a voluntary form of servitude one could enter into with the biblical law serving as the contract. This form of slavery served the purpose of making it possible for a person or even a family who had lost everything or were in some sort of trouble because the leader of the family had died or was killed in a war, gives them the opportunity to live with another family and work their way back into being able to support themselves, a sort of indentured servitude, if you will. This is an example, a perfect example of the community taking care of itself. So where you thought the Bible was preaching slavery, and listen, there are examples of that. You're going to find more examples of the Romans having slaves that look more like modern slavery. Less examples of that among God's law keepers. But what we see here coming from God is an example of the community taking care of itself. So be careful making that assertion against Christianity. It's not quite as black and white as you might think. I'm not sure if that was a pun or not. It wasn't intended. Now, I've mentioned this name a couple times here on this channel. Horace Greeley, an American newspaper editor and publisher who was the founder and editor of the New York Tribune, among the great newspapers of its time in the mid-1800s, said it very well when he said this, quote, "It is impossible to enslave mentally or socially a Bible-reading people. The principles of the Bible are the groundwork of human freedom." Unquote. And there you have it. In the 2012 presidential election, nearly 75% of Democratic voters claim to be religiously unaffiliated. There is certainly correlation between atheism and political leftism, even socialism, communism, and Marxism. History is a clear indicator of that correlation as well. A common argument heard in debates, Christian atheist debates, on the problem of evil is the fact that regimes headed by atheists in the past have been responsible for nearly 250 million deaths at the hand of the state in times without war. These were in times where no war was going on. Now you you might cry foul about the Crusades. You can do that all you want. And you'll get some valid resistance as to whether or not those movements were purely biblical or whether they were also state-led. Now, just appealing to the Bible doesn't make it a biblical movement. But as you'll find when you look through history, it is very difficult to defend atheism's bloody record as rulers. Now, the Christian ethic has enumerated in the Decalogue, otherwise known as the Ten Commandments, which was re-emphasized by Jesus in the first century, establishes a very clear position on issues like violence, private property, and personal relations. Now, we worship God, and we might just evangelize you with our words, but we are in no way inclined to infringe on your rights as Christians on anyone else or your private property. And we're eager to help anyone in need. Now, there are always exceptions, but those exceptions would be operating outside of the will of God, outside of His Word. Not an accurate representation. But what is the will of atheism? And let's, don't follow up with that whole argument. Atheism is just lack of a belief in a God. It's not an ideology. We've already shown that's not going to be an effective argument. It certainly is a movement, an ideology, and in my opinion, it's religious. You might feel that it's not, and you might really, really believe that. But if you pay close attention to society today, you'll see very clearly that atheism has become an ideology. In fact, as I just said, in my opinion, today, popular atheism looks an awful lot like a religion with specific dogmas, leaders, who function like priests, carrying the message across the world, and a whole set of religious writings of its own, in which the faithful unfaithful, may refer for updates on new atheist thinking, new ideas in the movement. For example, Richard Dawkins, who is your Pope. Richard Dawkins is the Pope of world atheism today. The religion of atheism has Richard Dawkins sitting in the chair as its Holy Father. Now, I regularly hear atheists saying things like, digs, insults, pejoratives, things like, oh, you need a sky daddy. Or just the other day, even something expletive-ridden, an expletive-riddled comment to me talking about how insane I was for appealing to a sky daddy. Now, what's interesting about that is how most atheists seem to need and promote the need for a government daddy to do their bidding, often crying out about their government daddy to remove the rights of those mean Christians who want to pray all over the place. The atheist movement in government would like to have that government daddy force me to do many things I believe to be unnecessary and even immoral, like take more and more of my earnings, steal from me in order to fund more and bigger government bureaucracies and regulations. If I desire to follow my own conscience and worship God and teach my child about truth and reason and God, very often the modern movement of proselytizing atheism pushes very hard to make that harder and harder. Private property is also upheld as a basic human right according to biblical principle in the 8th commandment that states plainly, thou shalt not steal. That includes property taxes and the right to my own body. Like we just saw in a stream the other day talking about in New Jersey, where the movement was to make it so that to take away the religious exemption for vaccination on your child, where the science is not settled. There is robust debate about that issue. But the vaccines are not the issue. The issue is the state wanting to take parental rights from the parent. If you love liberty, you'll see very clearly that biblical commandment prescribes and supports liberty and has done so in its present form for over 2,000 years and still holds up today as the very foundation of Western law and Western forms of government, democratic, republic forms of government. It's man and man's heart that is corrupt, not God's law. And look into that a little closer if you think that's a strange comment to make. The legal system in which that operates in the United States today and most countries who have a similar setup is founded directly on the Bible. Why do you think you're asked to put your hand on the Bible when you go into the courtroom and swear an oath? That's a topic for a different video, which I would love to get into. If you want to know more about that, about how Western law and Western society is founded directly on the Bible, I can direct you to the work of Clint Richardson. You can just do a search for his name. He is very articulate in this area, and his documentaries are enlightening in many ways, specifically to show you. Now, it's not going to be a Christian point of view, but it's going to show you how all of Western society and the law is based on the Bible. The worst thing a Christian might do in our societies, the worst you're going to get from us, those who are following Jesus Christ, Christians in the purest sense, the worst you're going to get from us is maybe we'll try to convert you using our words and sharing the gospel with you and talking about objective morality of God, which never changes. On the other hand, social atheism often seeks to impose their subjective moral agenda with the backing of the force of the state and its guns. So on one hand, the Christians might try to convert you with words. Far left atheism is going to try to convert you with the power of the state and their force. Now, as I said, there's an atheist I have a lot of respect for, Stefan Molyneux, who makes strong arguments against atheist doctrine. I'll give you some examples of that. It says things like this, quote, "Many atheists say they reject irrational authority, that they reject unjust and immoral authority." Molyneux says, "If you know an atheist or know somebody who's agnostic, bring them to the basic argument that the government is the initiation of force and that taxation is coercion, and see how they respond. Do they respond with, 'Wow, I never really thought of it that way before, tell me more'? Or do they respond like a religious fundamentalist when you challenge their faith?" Stefan goes on to say that it is most invariably the latter. He says, "I've had many, many conversations with atheists about this particular issue, that the government is an agency of force and that which you ask the government to do, you are begging for the initiation of force to be deployed in a geographical area. Specifically asking for coercion to force others to act against their own conscience." For example, Molyneux says that basic reality sort of helped me to understand that for the most part, atheism is an outgrowth of faith in the modern God called the state. That is their new deity, the state. You got a problem? Run to the state. Need something? Solved. Run to the state. Want something? Done. Run to the state. Feel bad about something? Pass a law. Take more money. Borrow more money. Print more money. That's how we solve everything. Run to the state. Get the guns out and everything is solved. He continues by saying, "Atheists in general, when they perceive a social problem, they just run to the government. And then atheists have the nerve to say to Christians, 'Well, you just have this magical thing called God, which is supposed to solve all of these problems like where the universe came from and how we evolved and so on. And how ridiculous of you. I mean, that's not an answer to anything.' Well, at least it's a peaceful answer to something. At least it's not a blanket, geographically enveloping, coercive answer to something." He continues by saying, "Do I particularly care that a Christian says that God created the universe?" He says, it's not big on my list of priorities come tax time, but atheists have a much more dangerous addiction to irrational authority than anything the Christian can come up with. He says, the left, the socialists, the Democrats, the liberals, they threaten you with jail if you don't obey their very visceral and immediate commandments of Big Daddy government. Their God is the Zeus of blood-drenched state power. If atheism was not associated with an addiction to the state and its power, I would have much more sympathy for it because it would be a little less in my face, a little less in my wallet with a shiv pressed up to my side. Strong words. Stefan also says, "If you take away God, into the power vacuum rushes the state, which is the blackest and darkest God in history." Atheists say, "Oh, well, the church did some bad things," and they'll talk about the Inquisition and so on and a couple thousand deaths. Molyneux says this, "The state, my friends, the secular, gun-addled, drunk with power state in the 20th century alone outside of war, slaughtered 250 million people. 250 million people were killed by the state. He continues by saying, oh, but you see, a few hundred years ago, they burned some witches. So, well, let's pile the bodies. You can probably see our pile of bodies from Mars. That is the pile of bodies, the pile of dead left by the state. 250 million. Molyneux continues and says, if I had to choose between more religious people and less government versus fewer religious people and more government, well, let's just say, take me to church. Unquote. So Molyneux has some strong words for atheists in general. Another point that is made is that, this is a very interesting point I thought to bring up. Protestant and evangelical Christians produce 2.5 children per family. Catholics, 2.3 children per family. And Jews, 2 children per family on average. Atheists are way behind, producing 1.6 children per family. Now wait, you might just say, wait a minute, no, climate change, overpopulation, you see, we're environmentally conscious. We're doing our part to preserve society. I say to you, propaganda. That's propaganda. You have believed the socialist lie because in order to maintain a steady population, in order to keep your nation from falling behind and going extinct in a matter of several generations, you need to produce 2.1 children per family just to maintain a steady population. Falling below that is to ensure your nation, your society, is gone in a very short matter of time relatively. Once again, let's make this clear. It requires at least 2.1 children per family to sustain a society or a nation. Today, atheists average 1.6 children per family, and agnostics average 1.3 children per family. Not sustainable. Now, in the name of convenience, such as 700,000 aborted children every year just in the United States, and the desire to pursue a career instead of having a family, sure, it's your right to choose. And even as a Christian, I'll stand up for your right to be free and choose your own way in life. But don't give us this argument about how concerned you are for the environment, how much you care about your future generations. Because according to your desire to remain godless adolescents seeking as much pleasure and gain as you can acquire in your lifetime, our nation won't survive anyway. If we all lived like you do. So, atheists, you might want to think whatever personal deity you revere, that there are Christians in the world creating families and making it possible for you to pursue a lifestyle of materialist satisfaction. Imagine if the generation your parents came from were so dedicated to materialism as you are. You might not be here in the first place if that were the case. Reconsider your subjective morality and reconsider your unfair judgment of the crazy Christians. It's a terribly blind contradiction that you have. And after all, somebody needs to be the adult in the room. Now, another point, self-sacrifice is a virtue. And whether you think it's a fairy tale or not, our example of Jesus Christ, the one who modeled self-sacrifice for the greater good of all humanity. You think it's a silly story? Let's just observe. You think it's a silly story. You think the resurrection. You think this. Let's just observe the objective truth that it delivers. We can talk about the validity of the story later. Just look at the objective truth that the story delivers to you. The method for perpetuating our species in peace, harmony, and prosperity is found right there in the doctrine of putting yourself last. God, family, you. In that ethic is where you find true happiness and a real legacy to leave. Now, Stefan Molyneux also has offered some more critiques of fellow atheists and their declaration of commitment to reason and evidence. That's what we hear. As atheists, they like to say that Christians are anti-science and anti-reason because we believe in fairy tales. Well, we've already shown that atheists believe in big daddy government, while they point the finger at Christians. Oh, you believe in a sky daddy. Well, what did that sky daddy teach? What has God taught us? What has Jesus Christ taught us? Can you find any fault in what Jesus Christ has taught us? Can you find any fault in following Jesus Christ? I'd like to hear from you if you can find fault in following Jesus Christ's example. So Molyneux appeals here to the idea of, reason and evidence. The atheists think they have the monopoly on reason and evidence. So he says this, rightly noting, quote, "If atheists were so committed to reason and evidence, then when you bring these arguments that I've just mentioned to them, they should very quickly and very easily recognize that their addiction to the state and to the self is a far more dangerous form of religion. A far more dangerous version of religion than mere Christianity, than that mere Christianity that C.S. Lewis converted to from atheism as a result of his own love of reason and evidence. Personally, I came to be a follower of Jesus Christ because of reason and evidence. And of course, help from the Holy Spirit that I didn't realize I was getting at the time. But reason and evidence brought me here. Not blind faith, not fairy tales. It was Jesus Christ himself who taught separation of church and state very clearly, which can specifically be seen in Matthew chapter 22, verse 21. My friends, my atheist friends, Christianity is not your enemy. In fact, Christians seek to take up the mantle where the state fails. Christianity creates community and takes it upon ourselves to perform charity in our communities in large numbers. Not that atheists don't do charity, of course they do. We seek to strengthen society. We gather once, sometimes twice or more a week to worship together, and we do not employ the government to force you to join us. We talk together about values and virtue and share ideas on how to do more for everyone, including you. What is it that atheists bring to our society? Of course, now, let's be clear about the moral argument. It is possible for one to be moral and live an ethical life as an atheist. The argument says there would be no objective morality without God. Not that it's impossible to do it. But what has this movement brought to our world? This new atheism, this flood of secular humanism and reliance on the human potential. What has it brought? Of course, now don't say science. Science is what it's brought. You can't make that claim that atheism has solidified science as the ultimate arbiter of truth. That's a crusty old straw man that has worn out its welcome in the arena of debate. because the history of science is pregnant with Christians and theists. And there are even more Christians moving science along today. Now, the argument, I played in a clip a couple streams ago, the argument that Bill Maher made, he said that our country would embrace science more if we were less religious. That is a baseless argument, and it's indicative of, at best, ignorance, and at worst, prejudice. If the nation were predominantly atheist, we would decline and die out in a matter of several generations. This, according to statistics, not hyperbole. Among this shocking movement today of factless, emotionally wavering social justice warriors, they largely identify as atheists. And what sort of progress have they caused? Well, we have progressed into confusion. Today, because feelings are paramount to truth and reason, we have a society that is confused and unsure if it's okay to say what's on their mind in public. Is that progress? Really? Is that really progress? Now, is that what the Greeks had in mind when with their agora? Meetings where ideas were shared and debates were had, the symposiums where the ideals of government and society were discussed and perfected, all of which we greatly benefit from today because they came together publicly and had deep discussions about tough issues and came to agreements, had disagreements. Today, you shan't utter a word in public without first running your speech through the filter of the social justice lexicon that has become the arbiter of right and wrong, but with no real compass of objective morality to stand on, feet planted firmly in the air. Just feelings. And beware the one who dares to offend the tender heart of the flighty social justice warrior who feels before he thinks and condemns that which challenges his perspective. We're not even sure how to address another person we see on the street today for fear of dead naming, misgendering, or committing some unforgivable social sin that might even get us arrested in certain provinces of Canada. Soon coming to a town near you, Americans. Is that the contribution of a godless, secular society? Is the right answer really to reject Christianity as an outdated superstition? What could be more unsure, amorphous, than the current society we have, where the majority are held hostage by the minority and are afraid to speak, afraid to greet, afraid to offer a hand of support, or state their opinion in public in the event one might be charged with a hate crime? We are dissolving into a godless morass of thick, impassable confusion, where conversation and constructive criticism of popular narratives are marginalized as hate speech. You're not allowed to challenge an opinion today if it comes from that far left region of confusion, of emotional, histrionic confusion. Is this really progress? Certainly it's progress. But what direction? Progress toward what? We can't always just seek progress if we don't have a clear idea where we're headed and whether or not it's going to be beneficial. And what we see here is clearly our nation could just disappear. Now here's another comment from Stefan Molyneux. He said, quote, "Atheists constantly mark Christians for rejecting reason and evidence, but atheism as a movement is less about reason and evidence and more an excuse to not do difficult things as an excuse to avoid the mutual reciprocal relationships that come from having a wedded community of value." He goes on to say, this leads atheists in general to be, I think the ancient Greek word is bitchy. Unquote. Molyneux also pointed out in his experience since becoming a public figure, he said this, quote, "I get lots of messages that say I'm a Christian and you're more Christian than Christians I know. I've never loved or liked an atheist as much as you." And he says these comments are very, very nice. Whereas the leftists, who again tend towards atheism, are just vicious bags of hysterical verbal venom. Horrible comments, he says. It's hard to avoid that the Christians do a lot more good in many ways in the world than the atheists do. They make a lot more sacrifices. They have a lot more children, and they tend to recognize and oppose the dangers of ever-escalating state power. He finishes up by saying, so it's hard to say, the cross is to my right, and the state is to my left, and I wobble to and fro. Unquote. Now, Stefan Molyneux, as a case study, is open about it. Had a childhood with an abusive mother, who happened to use religion as a tool of abuse. So, that's so unfortunate and sad, because it could be that has that plays some role in Stefan Molyneux's resistance to just take that step right on over into what we believe is objective truth with objective morality. His moral arguments are right on point. He just lacks that last element, something to ground your morality in, which, according to Christians, are the ethics of the objective morality given to us by the objective lawgiver, God. Now, as I said before, this is not meant to be a jab at all atheists. I respect and enjoy talking to atheists most of the time in my work. There are also those of various religious persuasions who can be intolerable. Christians can be intolerable. But here we're talking about a general perception and overall analysis of what atheism has to offer society as a movement. Once again, I fully expect to see in the comments the complaint that atheism is not an ideology, it's not a worldview or a movement, that atheism is simply the lack of belief in a God. Because the truth is, about 90% of atheists that comment on mine and other Christian YouTubers' videos don't actually bother to watch the videos in the first place. They just see a title or a channel name they recognize as Christian, and they say one of the same 4 or 5 standard responses, which is defined, I think, in the Hebrew lexicon as trolling. There are several YouTube atheist channels that I enjoy very much, and those posting the videos don't really match the description I've given here today, not in every way. For example, in addition to Stefan Molyneux, I really enjoy Tom Jump's YouTube channel. He has some very interesting interviews with fascinating people on his channel from both sides of the debate. Now, Tom Jump loves science and enjoys discussing issues with folks from various perspectives. Now, I disagree with him on some very core elements, but he is a patient, generous, and extremely smart guy who I'd enjoy having a chat with anytime. But now, shouldn't that be the way we think about conversation? To be glad to have our point of view challenged by someone who knows what they're talking about? That is how true progress toward virtue is made. Not just progress for the sake of progress, but progress toward virtue. Sadly, however, Tom Jump, Stefan Molyneux are in a large minority within the atheist YouTube community. The worst of which are the anonymous commenters who often blast away with expletives and insults from safely behind their screen names and avatars. And David Wood has a name for the Muslims who attack him this way, and he calls them keyboard jihadis. Given the nature of atheism we've discussed here today, and the Marxist bent to so much of their rhetoric, I think my term for these drive-by atheists will be keyboard Bolsheviks. And that's about all I have for you today, my friends. I want to keep this video short because I would like for a lot of people to watch it. And the longer these videos go, it is less likely that folks watch it. So I want to say God bless you all, and I appreciate you tuning in. And I look forward to seeing you here again next time.